Dr. Tyler. I think we're very close.
Yeah.
And so as Courtney just finishes up the very last few, I think we can go ahead and start the meeting if you can.
Mm-hmm.
Great. Awesome. Thank you, Courtney. I
Mm-hmm.
appreciate it. We'll go ahead and get started now. Let me welcome each of you to the Park Hill Golf Course visioning process. You are the official community steering committee. And I personally want to just thank you for being able to make it to this process and for your commitment to go through this process. I have to be honest with you. Not all of these processes are easy. This is one of them. There are lots of points of view here. Some of you may share those diversities of points of view, and our community certainly has lots of points of views, and this makes this work even more important. So I want to thank you for your commitment to do it. We won't really have time tonight to go individually for introductions through the group. So one of the things I'd like to ask you to do, if you wouldn't mind, is to introduce yourself in the chat room, and any affiliations that you might have would be really helpful for folks to be able to see. We'll introduce ourselves that way for sake of time saving. And along the way in our work together, we'll certainly get to know each other a little better. So I want to ask the steering committee if you would do that. That would be great. Just type it right in chat, your name and your affiliation. The agenda is right in front of you, and I also put the agenda in the chat. When we are no longer looking at this slide, I want you to be able to keep up with where we are. We will do a little bit of an equity dialogue tonight. It's not really training, but just dialogue about some of the things for us to be thinking about as we apply this lens of equity to what we are charged to do in this committee. You'll then hear from James Roy, who will give us a little bit of an overview on what the community navigator process is and how it has an interplay with your work as a steering committee. And then we'll get into steering committee chartering discussion. And I want to at least raise up why a committee charter is important, get your initial thoughts and things that would be important in that charter. And we'll refine that and send you a copy of some of the details of our charter for you to take your time and take a look at later. And then we'll do some follow-ups for our next meeting, answer any questions that you might have, and then we'll get you on your way to have your evening. So that's the plan for tonight. Thank you so much, all of you, for putting your introductions in the chat room. I appreciate that. So I'm going to start with a little bit of an equity dialogue. Courtney, can I get you to stop sharing your screen and I'll share mine? Thank you for that.
Dr. Tyler?
Yes.
Hey, I just wanted to ask, I believe we have Laura Aldretti, our Community Planning Development Executive Director. Could you just speak for a few moments?
Yeah, that would be
Thanks
great.
so much.
So, I forgot all about Laura. Not that she's not important, but Laura, why don't you speak to us? We had, I know that you have some things that you might want to share, and then Fred Glick raised something important that you might want to cover too, and that was questions that are coming from the community about how the committee was selected. If there's if that's something you can touch on too. Thanks for that, Laura.
Yeah. Yeah, and thank you for a few minutes. It's a very busy agenda that you all have. So I'll get through my comments and then respond to Fred's question. And then we can go from there. But just want to thank you, Dr. Tyler, for having me, and good evening to the 27 members of the steering committee. I think it's exciting that we're getting started tonight, and to all those who are watching from home right now as well. Hello and welcome. I look forward to us moving through this process together and learning and listening from each other to each other. My name is Laura Aldrete. I'm the Executive Director of the city's Community Planning and Development Department. And one of our primary responsibilities of our city agency is to work with communities to create long-term plans for how land should be used in the future. which is the question before you through this initial process. Many of you might be familiar with what this looks like. We recently completed master plans for Florida Heights campus in Southwest Denver and for the parking lot south of Bronco Stadium about a year or so ago. This spring, we'll be working in the neighborhoods around the Park Hill Golf Course to hear from residents on what you all would like to see happen with this land in the future. The advisory committee here tonight will help shape and guide that work. We know there are already many strong opinions in the community about this land now that the golf course is closed. And I think it's really important to iterate that everything is on the table and available to be discussed. If the outcome of the visioning process is a desire to see that the land remain a golf course, we will honor that. The city will honor that. This is really a community-driven process, obviously with Dr. Tyler here to help assist in that. And I always think of ourselves as leading from the side. If the outcome is for something other than a golf course, including open space or any kind of mix of uses, we'll continue moving forward with this committee and with the rest to determine exactly what that is, where what goes, and how much makes sense. So because of the easement that's currently in effect on this property, it currently limits its use to a golf course. The city's next steps will be determined by what we hear from the residents over the next several months and the leadership of the steering committee here tonight. Of the steering committee, but starting tonight and over the next several months. So it's really our priority is to listen to those who will be most impacted by any decision regarding this land and to ensure that no matter what happens, this site offers some type of significant high quality green space that can be accessed and enjoyed by neighbors for long into the future. So that I just wanted to start with that as the place that we come from, and as we are coming to the table on this effort and this dialogue with the community, and just to go back to Fred's question about how steering committee members were selected. I just want to make sure that neighborhood groups gave input into who they wanted represented within their group. So the RNOs selected who from within their group should be the representative as part of the committee. And then a step back from that was we opened the application. We created an application process, which is the first time that we've done this. We think it was a much healthier process in terms of digging deep into the community and hearing from voices that we otherwise might not hear from. So that application process pulled, created a criteria for who lived closest, trying to create a diverse range of participants to provide input into the process that we're here to begin tonight. So with that, I'll just thank the steering committee, in advance for the work and the effort and your commitment to the city, and Dr. Tyler, to thank you as well and your staff for facilitating.
Thank you, Laura. I appreciate it. So I want to get us started on a topic that I think is one of the toughest ones that we have going, particularly in our country, and that is the topic of equity. Now, I know that this is a seasoned group with lots of knowledge. My point here is not to patronize you and not to assume that you don't know what this means, but I'll be really honest with you. Sometimes, because we're not very practiced in this in our country, what we do to operationalize equity is hit or miss. So we understand it conceptually, and sometimes we don't think about how to make it operational. So part of the dialogue tonight, just to get us going, is to begin to think about what equity will mean for us in our process as a steering committee. I want you to have a lens for what it means to us. So I want to start by opening that up as a question. What does equity actually mean to you? It's not a trick question. I'm not looking for right or wrong, but to hear a variety of perspectives about what it even means when you hear equity is what I want to hear from you. Anybody willing to kick us off? Just unmute yourself if you will kick us off on that.
Yeah, to me, equity means balance. That there should be some balance.
Mhm.
And unfortunately, in Northeast Park Hill, there's becoming an imbalance, and we want to correct that imbalance and make sure that there is true equity.
Thank you, Imam. I appreciate that. So balance might be a way of thinking about this. Evelyn Barnes, I see your hand up. I don't know if it's up for this question or up for what Courtney is. It's up for this question. Okay, thank you. Go right ahead.
Yeah, so when I think about equity as it is defined, I think about giving people what they need when they need it, which is a major distinction from equality. Sometimes those words get used interchangeably, but they are not the same thing. In my definition, it's not the same thing.
Yeah, thank you. I agree with you. They're not the same thing. I think one of the easier things to do is to give everybody the same thing, but it doesn't account for what people really need. Sometimes giving people the same thing doesn't actually help things. So thank you for that, Evelyn. I appreciate it. It's good to see you too. How about other thoughts? Just go ahead and unmute yourself. It's fine.
Hi, I would like to say I think equity has a lot to do with access, people's access to opportunities and things in their communities if we're applying it to community, but also equity is seeking out everyone's voice,
Yeah, thank you, Danette. It's good to see you too. And thank you for that explanation too. It is a very intentional. Equity doesn't happen by accident. And if you're not constantly trying to seek out voices and many points of view, it's one thing to say we want everybody that thinks the same, but if you really aren't willing to commission different points of view, I also believe equity is tougher to have happen. So thank you for that. Go right ahead, just unmute yourself.
I have one for you.
Yes, thank you.
Equity is all things considered. Fairness is the first priority for all people.
Yes, thank you for that. I'm so glad you brought up the word fairness, because some things can have equality attached to them and still not be fair. Equity does contemplate fairness, which is something that oftentimes we don't talk about. So I appreciate you raising that as a consideration for us. Thank you.
I wanted to just add kind of an addendum to a couple of things that have been shared on equity, that it definitely has to represent balance and fairness. And I think it's also important to make sure that equity is not assigned by someone else other than the entity or the party that you're trying to represent. Because I think that bears along the sense of thinking that as long as there's equal access, that we've made sure that this service has been provided, or this product has been provided in a mass way. Doesn't mean that it's equitable. Equitable would require that someone that you're trying to reach actually has the opportunity to weigh in and to define what is happening in the process. And so sometimes I think we allow other people to make that definition or to make that representation for us.
Thank you so much, Pastor Dale. That's so true. Oftentimes we forget that co-creation of something is one of the most important parts of having a system of equity. If people are just handing it to you, It sort of keeps us in that rhythm that we've been in with equality, where you just get what's equal. This is really customized, and it really takes a collective to do it. And I appreciate you raising that as well. Thank you for that.
The two words that I had written down, and Danette spoke these as well, are opportunity and voice. And I'm not sure that I think of them as a definition, more in the sense of almost something that can be examined and measured to understand equity or the lack of equity.
Yeah, thank you for that. What an important consideration for us. I appreciate it. Other thoughts?
Equity to me is a need to fulfill based on the individual or the community in which you're serving. It's based on their need.
Yes.
Might be very different from another need in another community and how you access that.
Yes. Thank you for that, Jerry. It's great to see you too. I appreciate your thought there. I think what you're hearing are lots of different definitions of equity, none of them being incorrect. It shows you, though, the diversity of interpretation of what this word means. None of you can go wrong with what you said, but one of the things for us to do, and we'll do this over time, we won't do it tonight, is for us to be thinking about what it actually means for us as we apply it to some of the decisions that we'll be faced with making. I want you to know that equity needs to be foundational to what we're doing. But I want to spend a little bit of time tonight, not only exploring that with you, but even going deeper. I want you to think about not just equity. I actually want you to think about racial equity. Because the deeper we go into the topic of equity, the closer we get to pulling out the things that are really the disparities in the system. Equity, broadly spoken, looks at injustices across all kinds of things. Race equity gets very specific to things that are systemic in the system. And that's where we want to get. We want to get at what's systemic in our system so that we might contemplate, make our decisions as informed as we can possibly make them as a group. So I'm going to share my screen. I'm going to share it for a little bit, and then of course, I'm going to bounce back and ask you some questions. There are all kinds of definitions for race equity too. You had all kinds of definitions for equity, but there are all kinds for race equity too. Now, people have said to me, Nita, that little bit of common sense part of the definition, that one might be debatable. But I'm just saying, not everything is academic about the topic of race equity. I'm going to show you that in just a little bit. But when the system is out of balance, and a couple of you talked about that, with the system being out of balance, I think Imam talked about that a little bit. Black, Indigenous, and people of color communities feel the impacts of that most acutely. But the bottom line is, when there's racial inequity, everybody pays for it. It just doesn't work for anybody. But who it hurts most are people in the BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, people of color communities. And so as we journey through this process together, I do want you to be thinking about not only equity, but I want you to go deeper in racial equity and what are the implications of both. So I thought I'd also share with you, because I'm interested in your opinions about some of this too. I'm interested in your opinions about things that you're seeing right now in our society. And sometimes the things that we're seeing in society, Dylan, I think I'm seeing your hand like 500 times. Did you want to say something? Okay, maybe not. I'm sorry about that. I want to talk. Yes. Dylan?
This is Reverend Downing.
Oh, I had something on the screen that said Dylan was.
You. How's it going?
Good. It's good to hear your voice. I just saw Dylan.
I meant to text you and tell you. I'm sorry. I apologize.
That's okay. That's okay. I want to share with you just a few things that are happening in our social climate today. Just other things for you to be thinking of. And here's one of the things that's coming up.
No, it's all right. Yeah, I don't answer phone calls I don't know. So yeah, I understand that completely.
Okay, if you're not on mute, would you mind muting yourself? Thank you. One of the things we're seeing is something called the recency effect. And the recency effect is this phenomenon that happens where we tend to focus on what's right in front of us, and we tend not to remember what got presented to us earlier. So in many ways, what it's like is living in an episode or a snapshot. We just tend to remember what's right in front of us, and we don't connect the dots to the past. And so what I'm going to ask you to think about here is how much of what we do every day is centered on recency, and how much of it actually connects what we're centered on today to the past. I've got 3 young adult kids. I always tell them, pay it forward, play it backwards, because I want them to always connect what's happening right now to something that already happened. Our inability, sometimes even our unwillingness to connect what's right in front of us to something that already happened is a problem in the spirit of talking about equity. And so the other thing I'm going to ask you to do and to think about is for every decision that we're making, every conversation that we're having as a steering committee, don't let recency effect get in your way. Make sure that you know this, that there is a tentacle from what is in front of you right now to something that happened 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years or more behind us. Our ability to connect those dots actually explains what's in front of us better and informs us about what we ought to be recommending and planning for the future. So the recency effect is something we definitely want to disrupt, but I wanted to give it a name, and I wanted you to know our charge will be to try to connect the dots. The other thing that I just want to be honest with you about that's happening a lot, and it could in fact be happening to you right this minute, is compassion fatigue. Can anybody in the group tell me, in your opinion, what is compassion fatigue? If you've heard of that before, what do you think that is? Just unmute yourself and weigh in. What is compassion fatigue? Any thoughts?
Compassion fatigue is usually experienced when you give excessively to others, usually, for example, in a public service type of role, whether it be paid and or volunteer type of role, and you exert yourself to the point to where your ability to function and represent or advocate, etc., is manipulated in such a way that you can't do the best job. You literally get tired.
Mm-hmm.
which is why it's called fatigue.
Yeah.
Isn't it a point of exhaustion?
Yeah, thank you for that, Evelyn. You're absolutely right. That is exactly why it's called fatigue, because it is real fatigue. It's exhaustion from doing exactly what you said, from caring about something so deeply, maybe from being overexposed to something that you need to care about so deeply. I'm sharing this with you because it doesn't discriminate. It doesn't care who you are. It doesn't care what color you are. We all are prone to compassion fatigue. And even in this process of serving on this steering committee, you might in fact end up being faced with compassion fatigue. This is something that you care about for whatever the reason is, and your overexposure to hearing points of view and trying to work through something that you care about could in fact lead you here. It's very, very, that's a spot on definition that you have there, Evelyn. Thank you. So let's keep our eye on that in the committee. Here's another thing I want to share with you. It's upticking, this thing called imposter syndrome. It always upticks when we are in crisis, whether it's crisis at your home, in your workplace, or in a society. Even in an engagement like this, where we're not sharing the same points of view, sometimes can cause imposter syndrome. So here's my next question for you. What the heck is imposter syndrome? Anybody have a thought about what you think it actually means, just in your own words? What is imposter syndrome? Because it too doesn't discriminate. What is it? What is it? What do you think?
When you wonder what you're doing there and how you got in that room with all those people, because clearly they're the experts and you just have no idea why you're there. Gosh, these people know so much more than I do.
That's
I'm an
exactly
imposter.
right. That's exactly right. It is exactly what you just said, and it is not grounded in truth. It is a feeling of being an intellectual fraud. You simply have convinced yourself that you're not credible enough, you're not smart enough, you're not the right one to be talking about this, yada, yada, yada. That's what imposter syndrome would have you to believe. It is chronic self-doubt. It is this little whisper in your ear that keeps telling you you're not good enough. Why am I talking about that now at the steering committee meeting? Because there may be a point at which you begin to feel imposter syndrome, even in this process, that maybe you don't know the same thing that other people know, or maybe you've been told that your voice is not important, or maybe nobody told you that and you're just feeling it. That's imposter syndrome talking. I want you to know it because I want you to be able to mitigate it when you start to feel it. It looks like this image. It looks like you just believing that what you know is a lot less than what other people know, just like Fred said. When the reality is, you know a lot of stuff and they know a lot of stuff. It might not be the same stuff, but you both know a lot of stuff. So a part of what I want to help us do in this process is mitigate imposter syndrome wherever I see it. And I'm going to ask you to try to mitigate it wherever you see it, because this is a process that will count on all voices to be heard. So imposter syndrome is real. Here's one more thing I'm seeing a lot of. It's a tough one. I believe we still have a lot of discomfort and confusion about why we're centering on or leading with race. We are, but I don't know that everybody has an answer for why. Why are we centering on race? It's not a trick question. I never will do anything to trick you. But I am interested in your thoughts about why you think we're centering on race, especially so much right now. And here, let me just give you some freedom and liberation. Your answers don't have to match anybody else's. I'd be really nervous if I heard you all say the same thing. But I am asking you the question now. Why do you think we're centering on race? Any thoughts there?
I think, race is so shaped, our neighborhoods are so shaped by earlier attitudes toward race, earlier discrimination based on race. And that's formed our city and impacted our city enormously. I mean, it's foundational.
Thank you, Fred. It is foundational. We were built this way, and the system's doing exactly what it was designed to do. Yeah, thank you. How about other thoughts? Why do you think we're centering on race? Any other thoughts?
I think it's because there's a disparity. And oftentimes when we don't address race at the beginning and we sort of blanket over it, oftentimes Black, Indigenous folks will get left behind.
Yeah, we're having to be really intentional about that. You're right. We have to raise up who we're talking about or who most disproportionately has been impacted, or sometimes we gloss right over that. Thank you for that. Any other thoughts about the why? The why for you? They didn't tell me the steering committee was shy or quiet, so I'm just waiting.
Well, race has been a central issue in American society for over a couple of centuries, 2 or 3, actually 4 centuries. So it's a big issue, and it's something that we have to be very transparent about and address it openly.
Yes.
And as a collective.
Yes. Thank you for that.
That's very similar to what I was going to say. I would hope that race is a part of the question because we're at the beginning of something new. And I think it's very important that, that's where we start, because that's not been the way of the past. So I would hope that it's the way of the future.
Norma, thank you for being so inspirational in your answer. I tend to agree with you. I do think we're at the beginning of something. I know that might be disconcerting to people and give you compassion fatigue, because you're probably asking, well, what have we been doing all this time? But the reality is, we actually haven't spent a lot of time on equity. We've spent a lot of time on diversity and inclusion and equality, but we haven't really spent a lot of time on equity. And so I do ascribe to what you're saying, that we may be at the beginning of something, and probably the most important thing that we could be doing. I won't belabor the point, but I do want to ask you to do this. Call it homework. I do want you to have an answer to the question for yourself. Doesn't have to match anything that you just heard, but no one on this steering committee should be able to say, I have no idea why we're centering on race. I want to do all that I can to support you in being able to answer that question if you don't already have an answer. It is critical. This is the pivot point of all of the work, is to understand why this centering might be. Sometimes I want you to know that we get centered on race, not because of the social climate. Sometimes it's not even because of what color you are. Sometimes the centering on race has to do with the history of where we are in place. Some of you might recognize this picture. It is currently where Cleo Parker Robinson Dance sits. It was originally Shorter Community AME Church. You can tell in this picture that it is on fire, burning to the ground. Denver Fire Department there to put it out. The story has been that the Klan burned the church down because they didn't want a Black church on that corner of Park Avenue West and 20th. And that's a picture of it. I have to tell you, one of the reasons I center on race is that every time I drive past Cleo Parker Robinson Dance, I remember the history. It is a symbol of a really negative past right here in the middle of our city. So sometimes the answer to your question, why are we centering on race, is actually a symbol that's right here in the city, something that you see each and every day that reminds you of where we came from and what we still have to do. So sometimes I want you to know it can be grounded in that. Sometimes it can even be a personal story for you. And I want you to reflect on how personal this might be for you, because I think the more personal this work becomes, the easier it is for us to fully engage in it. So this is a close to home story for me. I want to share it with you because you might have a close to home story. You know, I center on race not just because I'm a Black woman. I center on race because of this picture. This is my great grandmother, Mamie Jackson. Very old picture. I loved her with all my heart, and I spent every summer with her in my childhood. She lived in Middletown, Ohio, which is, if you watched Andy Griffith and you know Mayberry, then you now know Middletown. My great grandmother used to tell me stories about her mother, who was born enslaved in this country. I didn't learn about slavery from a history book. I learned about it from the stories that my great grandmother told me about her own mother, those stories that were imparted to her. It was very real to me then, this slavery topic that we talked about for maybe 10 minutes in school. It became very real to me. It wasn't 400 years ago for me. It was as close as my great grandmother. That story's stunning enough, but what makes the story even more stunning is that my grandmother and my great grandmother were both domestic workers. You can see that from the picture. They were both maids, and they were maids in 2 generations of the same family. And if you can see that little boy that's standing next to my great grandmother, that's the little boy that she took care of. I used to play with him every summer. Here's what's stunning. The family that my grandmother and my great grandmother worked for were the original slave owners. They went from slave owner to employer. Well, that's why this is close to home for me. What a storyline in my own family that takes me very close to the very thing that we're talking about. I want you to think about your stories. They might not match my story. That's not the goal, but you've got one, each one of you, regardless of who you are. And I want you to be thinking about what your storyline is that brings you closer to centering race and race equity. It'll make all the difference in the world about what we do next together. So here's a little bit of homework for you. Sorry, you've got homework. I want you to be thinking about how you're seeing the things that I've talked about show up. I want you to talk about how you've seen compassion fatigue show up and imposter syndrome. How is recency effect and discomfort discussing race showing up? And I want you to start with you. You have permission to be selfish. How's it showing up in you first? And then I want you to think about everything around you. Most particularly, I want you to be thinking about how you see this showing up in community, because it's happening to everybody. I want you to think about that, because I want you to think about how that can sometimes show up. When people have compassion fatigue, it can sometimes look like they don't care. It can come across as you being apathetic. Why? Because you're exhausted. You can't do anymore. And so we spin a narrative sometimes about what that actually means. I want you to talk about that. What does it mean when imposter syndrome sets in? That one can look like apathy too. If you've convinced yourself that you're not credible enough, you might step out of a process, the very process that we need you to be front and center in. Sometimes it can show up like that. The recency effect gets us making short-term decisions without thinking about the long-range implications. And sometimes that's not enough to create a system of equity. It's temporary. And you know, this discomfort discussing race is something that we're all going to have to get comfortable with, as uncomfortable as it can be, because it's the centerpiece of advancing equity. So your homework is to really reflect and explore and discuss and then think about what we're going to do about these things. How do we heal it? And how do we disrupt it when we see it? And what will we use together as a committee to do the same with each other? If you sense, Kenneth or Noah, I'm sensing this imposter syndrome happening. I'm making that up. I'm sensing it happening. What will we do as a committee to disrupt that? So I wanted to share those things with you as considerations for us to be thinking about as we think about how we're going to center race and equity in some of our decision making as a group. Here's another hard part about the work. When you profess to do equity work of any sort, it calls for one thing that is a non-negotiable. It calls for us to interrogate the system. Now that's a hard word, but it's a word. To do this, we have to look at our own systems critically. We have to look at what's in front of us critically. In other words, we have to be asking ourselves every step of the way in this process, what is equitable about what we're saying or doing, and what is inequitable about what we're saying or doing? What are the things that we're involved in that are either promoting or preventing racial equity? It's a look in the mirror moment for us as a steering committee, and I've been through this enough to tell you it's not easy. We have to be willing to ask ourselves how our decisions might be working against or for individuals, groups of people, or a system. So that proactive system interrogation or process interrogation is something that we'll have to do. And then along the way, and we'll do this along the way, we don't have to do it tonight. I do want us to be thinking about what lens we're going to be using as we start to make recommendations or our own decisions, and what set of questions would be really important for us to be asking along the way. And these are just sample questions. Who currently benefits from the system that we're talking about, and who's historically harmed by it? What does our data tell us? We're going to be data rich in this process. What are staff and stakeholder perceptions about the system? What happens if we just leave things the way they are and don't augment anything is a conversation to have. What will we need to do or dismantle to achieve racial equity in what we're doing? And what would we construct in place of current systems? All of those would be types of questions that we'd be asking in our lens, but along the way, we'll refine the lens of equity that we'll use as we get closer to making decisions too. So I wanted to share that with you as just another piece for us to be thinking about. Here's another thing for us to think about. How does the past inform our work? Now, this takes me back to what I said earlier. We are real comfortable in the recency effect. It's a lot easier to talk about what's right in front of us. But to be thoughtful and to use critical thinking, we have to connect the dots. We must think about how the past informs what we're contemplating right now. So I want to share some examples of how you do that. I want to just play it out with you. A part of this work is going to be that we've got to continuously be exploring systemic and historical racism in our systems. We've got to keep that wheel turning in our head as we're making decisions so that we don't repeat the past. That's what we don't want to build, is version 2 of what already got built. But to do that, you have to think about some facts from the past and fast forward them to the current to figure out what's residual from the past. When we talk about systemic racism, one of the hardest things for people to wrap their heads around is how systemic racism is showing up today. We talk about it existing, but then we don't talk about much what it looks like today. What is it? What form does it take? So I want you to know that a part of what's important is that you take facts from the past and you fast forward them to today to determine what the residual effect is. So let me give you an example. The very first bullet there, poll taxes. Poll taxes were in place to disenfranchise Black voters. That's all it was done to do. It was just to keep you from voting if you were Black. Now I want you to take that historical fact. I want you to fast forward it. Bring it to 2020 and 2021. What residue of poll taxes do you see today? Any thinking about that? How's it show up today? Duran, go ahead.
Suppression.
Yeah.
Voter suppression.
Yeah, voter suppression. We might even see it in redistricting and how we're drawing lines. So fast forwarding it shows you that there's a tentacle from the past that's still sitting in our present. How about the second one? We probably have some veterans on this call. The marginalization of African-American soldiers who fought in World War I and II, but they were treated like second-class citizens at home. Let's fast forward that one. What residual do you see of that today? Any thinking about how that shows up?
Homeless men, Black homeless men.
We have a very large veteran, African-American, unhoused community. And guess what else? These soldiers that fought in World War I and II that were Black didn't even get the benefits that most other veterans got. They didn't get the GI Bill and they didn't get the VA mortgage benefit either. So their starting point was different. They didn't have the educational starting point and they didn't have the generational wealth starting point because of that too. For every one of these facts, you can fast forward them tentacles to what's happening right now. Black innovators who couldn't get patents, doctors that practiced their surgical techniques on Black bodies without anesthesia. Distrust of the healthcare system is a tentacle to that one. And so we can go on and on and on. And I got on and on and on those, but that's going to be very important for us not to be cursory about what we're talking about. Let's connect what we're talking about to things that already happened so that we know the gravity of our decision making. So I wanted to show you how you work that out and just playing it forward.
let's not forget mental health as well.
Bingo. Go ahead. Tell me a little bit more about what you mean. I'm with you.
Well, when you are you have those type of influences in the society where you can't get housing or all the other things that you mentioned earlier, that can lead to mental health issues.
So you take one problem and create a new problem.
That's right.
It's a cycle. Absolutely. Thank you for that. Really important for us to do. As I get ready to wrap us up a little bit on this, I do want us to continue to think about bias too. Bias is hard for me to talk about. One, I think often what we do is we talk about bias from an unconscious lens. We talk about everybody has bias and everybody has unconscious bias, and we do things because we don't know we did it. And then we stop the conversation right there. I want you to know it is not enough to say that. We all do have biases, but that is not a complete sentence. What are we going to do about it is a part of the complete sentence. So I say, let's not start talking about unconscious bias, the biases that are formed outside of your awareness where you sometimes don't even know you're doing it. Let's start with the obvious one. Let's start with the conscious, explicit biases that we all have. These are the prejudices that you formed against or formed about other people or things. We do all have those, but we tend to skip over those and then rest nicely in the fact that we have unconscious ones that we don't know about. I'm going to challenge us throughout this process to try to disrupt the ones that are conscious. These are the prejudices that you know you have, because every conscious bias that you have in some ways is attached to the unconscious. And I want you to know they've got tentacles to one another. Now, I want to play something out for you. I'll just make an example of myself so I don't put any of you on the spot. I have a conscious bias I'm going to share with you and the whole audience. I have a conscious bias against people that I think don't want to learn. I don't mean go to college or go to school. I mean people that think they know everything and don't want to listen to you. Them. That's my conscious bias. And I believe I can pick them out a mile away. I've just convinced myself I know who they are. That's my conscious bias. Now, it's not right. It's just a conscious bias. So I want you to think about this for a minute and don't overthink it. If that's my conscious bias, the one I know I have, what do you think I might be doing to those people that I think are that unconsciously? What do you think I might be doing to them? Any thoughts? Go right ahead. Just unmute yourself.
You might ignore them.
Bingo. Completely ignore them. Not even make eye contact with them. Can't even hear what they said. Dismiss them. I might even go into a debate with them for no reason. Now, you see how quickly you were able to tell me what I might be doing unconsciously? That's because it is that easy. I want you to use that as a tactic. It is an unscientific tactic. If you name your conscious bias without overthinking it, I want you to just think about what you might be doing unconsciously because of it. It really helps to mitigate the bias when you do that. Making a commitment to do this is really important. We're going to need it in this process too, because we're all coming to the table with a bias and we're going to have to challenge it, because we're going to have to challenge it with each other. So I wanted you to see that little tip about what you can do about mitigating it on your own, because only 5% of what we're processing goes through our conscious brain. That's all our brains can take in, 5% of thoughtfulness and intentionality. The rest of what we do and the rest of how we behave, 95% of it comes out of our unconscious brain. I want you to sit with that for a minute. If 95% of what we're doing, saying, and how we're behaving is coming out of our unconsciousness, I want you to think about what might be happening in the world. Half the time we're just doing stuff because we're used to doing it and we know how to do it. And it's not being interpreted and processed in a very conscious way. We have to shift what we're doing here, but this is the science behind how we do our thinking and our behavior that comes out of it. So I know you know this too. This bias that I'm talking about is not just in our hearts and our minds. We talk about hearts and minds a lot, but bias is just baked right into systems. And that's one of the reasons systemic racism stays where it is, because it's institutionalized, even bias. And this is a smart group. I know you know all these things, but we just got to keep this in our forefront. Healthcare. Imam, you're talking about this a little bit. There are implicit biases just embedded in the very essence of healthcare. We know that women and racial minorities and ethnic minorities is subject to less accurate diagnoses. We get written off a lot quicker. And the opioid crisis. You want to know why the face of the opioid crisis is white? It's white because we overprescribe pain meds to white people and we underprescribe pain meds to people of color. Why? Because of the bias around pain tolerance. That's what all of the studies have shown us. We have doctors who think people of color have a higher pain tolerance than white people. So people of color don't get prescription pain meds and white people do. And guess what that did? It created a crisis called the opioid crisis around prescription meds. Those biases are stuck right in our system and they play themselves out over and over and over again. We also see bias even in the COVID-19 outcomes. When we look at COVID-19 deaths, you can see who's leading in deaths per 100,000 people in the US. It is our Black and our brown communities. This is baked right into our system, associated with all kinds of other things in the healthcare system and access. Some of you talked about access. We also know a whole lot about the criminal justice system, that we know that these disparities start in schools and they make their way all the way through to the criminal justice system. If we're suspending Black students at higher rates, and we have overrepresentation of Black youth in youth justice systems, then the math takes you to the big criminal justice system where we're overrepresented there too. These systems are intricately woven together that keeps the disparity institutionalized and alive. We have to be thinking about that. And even with jobs, some of you know this in workplaces. This is a really famous experiment that happened. I remember when it was done, they took 100 resumes and they put Black sounding names on half of them and white sounding names on the other half of them. And then they sent them out. They sent them out to employers. Well, the same resume. So the resumes that had the white sounding names got 50% more callbacks. We even have biases around names and who we think people are based on those names. So all of these things are things for us to be thinking about, how our biases can show up, where you're seeing bias in the system, and our ability as the steering committee to call that up will be really important when we see it. We want to make sure we don't have it in our process, but we certainly want to make sure that we can call it out if we see it so that we might do something about it. I'm going to skip that one and I want to go here. You know, it's Black History Month. We just came out of the Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. holiday. And I centered a lot during that time and now on his famous letter from the Birmingham jail. And there's some points in the letter that I just want to leave us with as we think about equity as we go forward in our journey. You know, Dr. King wrote the letter maybe 4 days after he was arrested in Birmingham because he was peacefully protesting. And the letter is reflective of his disappointment. He was disappointed in people that were supposed to stand for the same things that he stood for. He was disappointed with clergy people. In particular, there were 8 white clergy people that he was disappointed in. I want to share with you some themes of his disappointment because I want to inspire us to pay attention to them. One of the themes, he heard from his clergy folks were, this is unwise and untimely of you to be doing this protest. It is not the right time and it's not smart. Let me use this to say to each of you, this is wise and this is timely that you in this moment are gathered to provide input to a very important process in our city. You might hear from someone that it's unwise and it's untimely. I want you to challenge that because I want you to stay true to your purpose on this committee. It's not going to be easy, but I would argue that it is wise and it is timely that we come together to have the conversation. You might get this, that you're an outsider. Dr. King was told, what are you doing here? You don't even live in Birmingham. You're an outsider. Sometimes in this process, or even in equity work, you're going to feel the same way, that you're an outsider. This is imposter syndrome. This is how it can show up. I want you to know in this process that we aren't going to allow outsiderness to happen. In order to do this well, the thing that this group has been charged with, you have to work in a collective, you have to honor all of the voices, and you have to think about connecting the dots. You can't do that if you feel like you're outside of it. So challenge the notion of outsiderness. Here's something else that happened. Dr. King described it as very complicated truths. What he talked about was being caught between two types of Negroes. That's what the letter talked about. Negroes on one side that were so oppressed and exhausted and harmed that they didn't have the energy to do anything. And Negroes on the other side who had made it socially and economically and educationally, who thought this didn't have anything to do with them. He was caught between two very complicated truths. The same thing may be true for you. Maybe being on this committee, maybe decisions that you'll ultimately make may put you in a position to face into very complicated truths. I want you to know that that is a normal, natural, yet hard part of what equity work calls for. If you're not facing very complicated truths, you in fact probably aren't doing the hard work of equity. Couple more. Oppressed people cannot remain oppressed forever, is what Dr. King said. You know, when we talk about equity, I often tell people I think equity is in our sight line. I don't think I've ever seen that in my lifetime. It may be a symptom of or a symbol of oppressed people not remaining oppressed forever. I do think you reach a tipping point where it simply can't exist. I hope that we're there, that we are willing and able and conscious enough to say, we can't let this live on our watch, this thing we call oppression. Very important for us to think about. And lastly, Dr. King, he talked about clergy people. That was his context because he was a preacher. The passivity of the church is what he was talking about, but I want you to fill in the blank. What are you disappointed in? The passivity of who or what? If they weren't so passive, or if it wasn't so passive, we could get further along in our equity work. So to contemplate the passivity of what or whom will be really important for us, because whoever that is or whatever that is what we'll need to energize to get equity work done. And then I'm going to end with this, and then I'm going to leave some space for us to ask any questions or weigh in any way. It's my favorite James Baldwin quote, and it is, not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it's faced. I really believe that. And I think we're facing some hard truths, some complicated truths. I'm happy to be on this journey with you. I hope that you will think about all of these different things. And let me stop sharing the screen now and get you to weigh in any way that you feel fit? Anything that sticks out to you in the talk? Comments, questions, weigh-ins, additions, any of those things from the committee? Yeah, go ahead, Jeff.
Hi, how are you? You know, I thank you for the presentation. I thought it was really good, and I thought, you know, really helped me reflect here, you know, just being a part of this committee. One thing that really stood out to me, and it was something I was thinking about, you know, even as we started, you were asking questions about what equity meant. You know, I really think this, I don't know if concept, but just being conscious of how we are and who we are and how we look at these issues, I think is really key and important to this effort. Certainly looking at and really sharing in the concerns that any members of the community might have as we go forward. But you know, I think that's just so key is, you know, how we truly take those into account as we collectively, you know, make decisions. So that, to me, that was very powerful. So thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. I appreciate that. How about other thoughts?
I also want to thank you, Dr. Nita, because I live in Park Hill and I feel like our neighborhood is so diverse and I am happy to represent it. But I feel like when I first came to the steering committee, I was like, oh my God, I'm going to have to fight for my people. What are they going to do with that? And I think it's good that you're thinking of the community as a Mexican American, as like my neighbors that are Black, and we all love each other, and we just, you know, we just want to be represented, and we want to make sure that you are listening. And so thank you for all of that, because I feel like there's a lot of people in this call, and I don't know how many. I mean, I'm sure you guys all know about the Park Hill neighborhood, but it's a really awesome, colorful neighborhood, and I just want to keep it that way. And I want to make sure that I represent my community, you know, in a good way with you guys.
Thank you for that. That's so important. I appreciate you saying that. Hold that with all of your heart. Yeah, thank you. Other thoughts, comments, anything you want to weigh in?
I also appreciate the level setting conversation, Dr. Tyler. So thank you for that. I think we're really doing everyone a disservice if we don't recognize that our experiences in all cultural aspects that we have lived in have a huge impact on our experience throughout our lives. And so I really appreciate everyone being able to name that, or for you being to name that explicitly for us so that we're all on the same page in that regard.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you. Other thoughts? So we'll keep circling back to this. I won't let it go. We'll continue to use this language and ground what we're doing. I'm going to be asking us along the way to really refine the lens that we're going to use as we get closer to making decisions. I'm not a part of the decision making. My job is really just to help you move towards a decision. I don't weigh in at all. I will respect whatever this committee decides, but I want you to be able to do it in a framing that you'll feel proud of and comfortable with. And so I'll help us to shape those kinds of questions that keep fidelity in that. So thank you so much. And I'll send you an email with the slide deck in it, just so we can keep our materials pretty consistent. So I'll be sending you that too. So next on the agenda is James Roy, who is going to talk to us a bit. James, you've got plenty of time because I finished sooner, to talk about the Navigator process, which is another input to this whole process. I guess one of the most important things for us to know and for the community to know is this steering committee is not the decision maker. There are lots of different inputs to the decision making, and the Navigator process is another one of those inputs. So James, I want to hand it over to you and give you the floor as you see fit.
Thank you so much. Hey, everyone. Yeah, just to echo that, the Navigator process, it's called Community Navigators. It is a process that is focused on equity, just like we were just talking about there. There's a lot of, you know, whenever we're in public processes, it tends to be more comfortable for people that have the the gusto within them to share publicly. It can be really alarming for some people, right? And a lot of, and also usually provides the time and the space for people that have the most privilege to attend some of those public events. This community navigator process is something that we do to really get right at that equity point, not only for the people of color in our neighborhood, but also just those that do not view public meetings as a place to share their heart, share their feelings, share what's going on with what's the types of changes that could come to a community, like the potential of this. I've got a presentation here. I'm going to share. I'm going to give you some feed or give you a rundown of what Denver Metro Community Impact is, and also what the process is that the community navigators are about to embark on, and how that fits within everything that we're doing here. So let me see. I'm going to make sure I can share a screen. Looks like it's disabled for me. Anyone able to enable me real quick?
Yeah, I'll get on that.
Thanks, Courtney. Looks like I've got it. Cool. All right. 1 second here. Cool. Got it. All right. You can see what I see, right? Cool. All right. So the, like I said, community navigators, Park Hill Golf Course. The DMCI, of course, stands for Denver Metro Community Impact. We used to be called Park Hill Collective Impact, and changed our name in the summer of 2020 to reflect some of the changes of the neighborhood, to reflect our intention for creating equitable environments around the Denver metro area, specifically in Park Hill at first, but and what that looks like for a neighborhood that is obviously gentrifying, and gentrification is the process of that improvement in the community from the hey Talia, sorry, can you sorry guys, but from a property standpoint, the displacement that comes from gentrification is the problem that people are most aware of, that negatively associates the gentrification issue. So when we saw people that the neighborhood starting to change, and to be very specific about that, for example, Northeast Park Hill was 70% Black in the year 2000. It became 53% Black in the year 2010, and now is predicted to be below 40%. When you think about the numbers of population within that change of that percentage, it's a pretty alarming thing, and it's something that provokes a lot of emotion for people. So we changed our name because of that, and the realization that we wanted to understand. Talia, can you go upstairs for just a little bit? All right, I'll be back. Sorry, everyone. Where was I? Anyway, yeah, we changed our name based off of the realization that we want to be able to impact families even as they're being displaced, and that a neighborhood boundary does not, if a family's displaced, does not mean that we stop paying attention to what's going on in their lives. And so that was really what reflected the change there, amongst a number of other things. The mission of Denver Metro Community Impact is to advance equity and generational success by elevating the voices of the systemically oppressed through the facilitation of organizational collective action led and constructed by the community. So any process that we enter into like this has to be around that, and creating the vision of equitable Denver communities where children are thriving, not just surviving. So that was really important, of course, into entering this process. Is that something that we could actually start to accomplish through, our mission and vision through interacting in this process? What we do as an organization is we're what's called a backbone organization within the collective impact framework, which is a framework that's used by a lot of different nonprofits across the country and now even across the world. And it's the main mission around collective impact, regardless of the work that it carries out, is really to eliminate the silos of nonprofit work, to eliminate the silos of work in general, and make sure that people are collaborating and sharing the goals and measures for which success is accomplished. And so, what we do is a modified version of collective impact, and I'll get to why it's modified in just a second here. But our 6 main goals, our 6 things that we do as an organization in our community leadership, is cultivating the community engagement and ownership of that, guiding the vision and strategy, supporting aligned activities of all of our network partners, establishing shared measurement practices, so knowing how we can say that we've succeeded through data, advancing policy once we recognize what those issues are, and then mobilizing resources to make sure that every one of our network partners can get together and make sure that happens, because obviously resources are required to make the work happen. This is a snapshot of our workflow, a visual representation of that leadership that I was just talking about there. Everything starts with us for community voice. So that's a little different than how most collective impact organizations have begun. And collective impact, the framework, came out in 2011 out of Stanford, and was created by a lot of researchers and folks that were trying to study different ways of making the community work happen. And unfortunately, a lot of that, as it was formed, forgot to include community in it, and how to source community into those things. So we've modified our collective impact initiative, and have decided that everything that we do has to start with the community's voice. So this workflow right here, the community voice at the top, is a reflection of that. We go down into this area that says community advocate, which you can exchange the word advocate for navigator in this circumstance. The advocate, who is a leader in the community, is connecting with a lot of different people, understands the pulse of what's going on with families and children and everyone that's in the community. It shows up in a report, which I'll get to how that fits into this process, and in the public meetings of how the community is going to engage in things. After that comes the collective action, which is a lot like the steering committee, right? The people coming together and saying, okay, we understand what's going on. We see that the community is facing this and that. We also also include community members, just as the steering committee does, and creates the work and the advocacy solution or change that is ultimately delivered back to the community. For this process, we're focusing on that. DMCI, at least, is focusing on the top 3 portions of that. We are collecting that community voice through our community advocates and providing a report to the steering committee and the community at the same time. What does that look like? This is the way that we envision Park Hill Golf Course visioning process looking for us, in reflection of that workflow. Same thing here. Of course, you get the name change of the community navigator. You get a voice report, which is what we're going to be providing here from this process, and that'll be delivered to the steering committee, and a number, as well as the decisions that come out of that, and the other things that are going on to create the solution or future that we have all decided upon, right? This slide right here is explaining the overarching goals and responsibilities of the community navigators. I want to explain also that there's 8 community navigators that we'll be working with in this first phase, and 8 in a second phase later down the line in this process. The overarching goals are to engage and organize the marginalized and harder to reach population of around the Park Hill Golf Course. The focus, of course, is on, like we talked about, for equity, is about the African American population, Latinx population, the seniors, youth, and renters that tend to be harder to engage, especially from, when I say that, I'm thinking about renters, because renters sometimes, with the desire to have a more permanent footing in a community, can often be overlooked because of the status of renting. So we think about that as well. The responsibilities for these community navigators are to share project info with the community, collect and track the feedback of these meetings that we'll be having, distributing flyers and invites for the larger meetings and events, such as the steering committee and other public meetings that will come from this, communicating with Denver Metro Community Impact, organizing 2 of the Park Hill Golf Course talks each. So we got eight navigators. That means we got 16 meetings to have. And then there's also a new thing that we're trying here. Beyond just meetings, we're going to be trying to have the navigators have one-on-one conversations throughout the community to understand from a conversational standpoint, from to an equity standpoint, to reaching out. How can we have those conversations and understand the pulse of the community in some different ways here? The last piece of that responsibility is that in April, we will be presenting the community navigators will be presenting their findings to the steering committee. So all 8 of them will participate in that, whether or not that's led by a smaller subset of them or all of them, that will be their choice on how that presentation goes. This is, getting into just want to give everyone a timeline of this first phase of the community navigator process. February, each navigator will have a Park Hill Golf Course talk done. The goal is to have at least 8 to 12 people, community members, show up to those meetings. They also will have at least 8 one-on-one conversations with community members. They will be really reporting their findings in a Google form that Denver Metro Community Impact has put together. It'll be easy for them to follow and put in data, and we'll be able to see that come in as it goes, and that'll help us produce our report, the community voice report at the end of it. Most of this right here, I modified from a presentation to some of the community navigators that'll be as a training purpose here. So you might see some things in here, like it says collect payment. They will be paid for their work on this. The March is very similar to February. You've got another meeting that they need to put together, another 8 one-on-one conversations, the reporting, and in April, the presentation. On the other side of this slide here, I wanted to define things a little bit better, just in case things get lost there. So a community member, we define that as those that live, learn, work, worship, or play within the half mile of the Park Hill Golf Course for this process. A Park Hill Golf Course Talks meeting. I'm slipping on the name of that because we have another very similar named effort that I'm sure a lot of folks have heard of as well too. But these are small conversational meetings that to hear from community. One-on-one conversations, of course, we already talked about that. Those are quick chats around the community. And I defined the steering committee for the navigators on that slide, and we already know what that is. Facilitating a Park Hill Talks conversation. This was really to get to the point of what these are. These are small conversational community meetings that cultivate change through the sharing of personal stories and the experience of being in this community. The talks are also direct all of the action. Like I said, everything that we do with the voice work starts with these talks. So it directs all the action of Park Hill Strong and the Denver Metro Community Impact Network, which is a long list of great organizations and providers that really do a lot of awesome work throughout the community. what we provide in those meetings is food, gift cards for participants, and someone that shows up to make sure that the facilitation and the notes are going well for those meetings. The one-on-one conversations, like I said earlier, those are something that we're building together. I'm going to try and speed this up because I'm running out of time here. They're spontaneous conversations that might happen in a salon, the barber chair, on the street, at the grocery store, wherever it might be that community, gathers at or goes to. The church, the mosque, anywhere. The way that the navigators will be collecting information, they're going to let people know that they're talking about the Park Hill Golf Course. You can identify how they're associated with the community. They're going to talk about what their stance is on the golf course, and really kind of get that information, what the mood is, what the trust and distrust might be, some of the feelings that are going on there. I think one of the things that's really important about, especially in communities of color, is that there's just as Dr. Tyler was saying, there's a lot of feeling that comes up from the legacy of choices and issues that have happened, especially around public processes. We want to be able to document that and understand that at a deeper level. This is the last slide, so I'm wrapping it up. But the Community Navigator goals for this phase 1 side of things, like I said, this is just kind of summarizing everything, adding it up, and letting you know what we're doing. 16 talks with 8 to 12 community members at each of those talks. That means we're going to engage around 128 to 192 community members at the lowest there. There's going to be at least 128 one-on-one chats from the 8 conversations that each 8 are having per month. Then we're going to produce the report to the community and steering committee. It'll be published to both at the same time. There won't be any time to review. We'll just publish that and make sure that everyone understands what the community is saying, and that the steering committee has the opportunity to read that and for that to weigh into your decision making and whatever it is that you're thinking about this process. And then lastly, of course, the presentation that I've mentioned a number of times. Total community members engaged through this process we predict to be between 256 and 320. So that's the Navigator process. I don't know if we have time for any questions there because I went a little long, so I apologize for that. But,
no, James, you're okay. We had the time to do it, so thank you.
Cool. Awesome.
Yeah, thank you. I do want to leave some space though for the steering committee to ask any questions of you. Let's just open the floor to the committee. Any questions at all? Anything that James can clarify in the process?
Just a request, I guess, is that I'm here representing the Clayton RNO, and I think the RNO would very much like to ensure that your work and the work of the community navigators is informing whatever position the RNO eventually instructs me to take. And so I guess I would ask if there is a way to ensure that the information you collect can be disaggregated so that we can really understand what the voices that you're hearing out of our neighborhood are.
Great suggestion, Fred. And yeah, we can make that happen. I'm glad that you said that in this meeting because it wasn't something that I was thinking of as far as disaggregating the community from that process. So glad you said that.
Thank you.
Other questions of James or thoughts?
I have a question.
Of course, go right ahead.
What is the expectation of the steering committee during the Navigator process?
There's no expectation from the steering committee on the Navigator process, other than that we'll be delivering the report to the steering committee and community, and would love to, of course, have that taken seriously and read, and of course, for any questions that come from that to be directed towards Navigators and DMCI.
This is Lisa. I wanted to say thank you for the process that you're developing. I actually read your contract for your outreach. So that's my background too, is public outreach. And I love the fact that we're paying and identifying people in the community to do the navigation. I love that we're paying people to participate. I love that we're offering food if it's in person. I think all of that goes to that equity piece that we were talking about at the beginning of our conversation. And I'm really happy to see that that's being supported in this process.
Well, thanks so much, Lisa.
I have a quick question. And I don't know if this is the right space to ask it, but I know that I hope that James and Dr. Tyler, you're being compensated for your great work here. And just want to, I think we have a lot of people watching, and I don't actually know this. And like, is this something the city's paying for? Is it something that the people that bought the property are paying for? Like, I just had a question, and I think people would be interested to know that.
Yeah, I can answer my end of things first. And yeah, this is a contract with CPD, but Denver Foundation actually also lent some money in to make this work possible.
Thank you.
Yeah, same for me, Noah. Yeah. Other questions, comments?
David raised his hand.
Go right ahead, David.
Thanks. I just have a quick question since the topic of being of this process being paid for, and certainly maybe Denver, the public planning department can speak to this more broadly. But why is it that the city of Denver is paying for this process? Why is the owner of the property not putting up money to also help pay for this process? It's their land. Mm-hmm. This is going to benefit them in the end. So why are they not paying something toward this? Why is there not some type of cost share going on?
One of the things that I kind of think, and I'd love for someone else to jump in on this too that would be knowledgeable on it, but if Westside were, for example, to pay for this process, and for example, if the information comes back that everyone wants it to remain open space, for example, that in itself is a conflict of Westside paying for this or part of this, because it's not necessarily going to automatically benefit them. And I'll stop right there because I don't want to speak for the city or speak for Dr. Tyler, but that's my viewpoint of it.
David, do you want to weigh in?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. This is David Gaspers, Principal City Planner in Community Planning and Development. And James is on the right path there. I mean, it is important that we have this community conversation, right? That's what we want to learn and hear from the community on what the vision for this land is, which currently is a former golf course, right? And we want to hear from everyone on what that vision is. And we feel like the city and CPD in particular is best prepared to help that process, right? And that's why we have engaged with Dr. Tyler, James, as well as David Evans and Associates, a planning firm that does more some technical studies, learning more about the existing conditions, about mobility, the parks and open space needs, as well as the market for all of Northeast Park Hill, really not just the site. Just a better understanding of what we're dealing with. We're going to be providing that information to the steering committee so we can have these conversations. And so it is right. I mean, Westside does own the property, but it's also the city's opportunity here to frame the conversation about what's best for the site with this equity lens that Dr. Tyler is leading us with. So.
Thank you, David. Are there any other questions around the Navigator process or anything associated with it? Okay. James, thank you so much for taking the time to give us a little orientation on the Navigator process. And we also will look forward to our relationship with the Navigators. I am really excited to hear the input that comes from your team. So thank you so much. And then let us know along the way if there are things that you need from this group to help in that process too.
Sounds great. Thank you all so much.
Thank you. So I'm going to keep going. There's the likelihood that you're going to get finished early here. Who's ever heard of that? You might have at least 15 minutes of your life back. So let me just go to what's next on the agenda, which is to talk about our committee charter. Our chartering discussion will be really important, and we'll really spend some time developing it in the next meeting. I'm going to send you a draft charter to just kickstart your thinking. But I thought we'd spend a little bit of time talking about why it's important. There are some things that are suggestions that come up from community, and we want to make sure we're contemplating some of those suggestions in our charter if we can, if it makes sense for it to be institutionalized in our working charter. One of the things that has come up is the community wanting to know a little bit more about our affiliations as members of the steering committee. So on the website, it's your name, it's got, I'm a part of an RNO, it's got the basic level of affiliation. The ask is that you go deeper in describing what that affiliation or other affiliations might be. Some of you have already done that, some of you haven't. So part of what we want to talk about when we get into our chartering conversation is, what do we need to be saying in full transparency to communities if they're asking? How do we respond to that or address that through the content of our charter? So I want to let you know that I think we've got a pretty immediate action item there. We've heard things around maybe non-disclosures and all kinds of other things. All of those things can be contemplated in the charter. So let's just tee up our thinking around what we want in a charter, and some things that would be really good working norms for us as a group. When we get to the point where we need to get to some sort of consensus in order to make a recommendation, those norms will be more important than ever before. So we do want to spend some time on that. So I want you to just be ready to count on spending a bit of time in our next meeting. And for the community that's watching, I don't know if that'll be a painful process for you to watch us work through a charter, but it really is important, and we want to be reflective of some of the things that we're hearing from you too. Does that sound okay to everybody, that we spend some time on that committee charter next meeting? Okay, great. The other thing I want to just tee you up for is what's next in our meetings. I want to sort of lay out what you might expect in a meeting. Now, because it's a public meeting, it isn't reasonable that we do breakout work and small group work, things that you might typically do in a meeting to get some of the work done. It just isn't transparent to the community. So everything that we do will be in a big group. So part of what we want to make sure we're doing is establishing, and we can talk about this in our charter work, establishing a way to communicate in a way that everybody has an opportunity to weigh in. It's a little hard to do that in a big group, but it will be really important for each of you to feel like you've had a voice in the process. I'll do my very best to facilitate that as best I can. But we're going to ask you to sometimes do something that you might not be comfortable with, which is unmute yourself and say something or weigh in. And I want you to know that that's okay. We need to have your voice. But to do it in a group this size, is sometimes really hard. I want to make sure we're hearing all of the voices. So what you can expect from the next meeting, beyond us really nailing down what our charter language needs to be, is we're going to focus on the Park Hill Golf Course and the neighborhood. Now, some of you are in the neighborhood for sure. So it's kind of a Park Hill 101 of sorts. It's a level setting of what we're actually doing here. All the details about the status of the property, what's possible, the grounding in the historical story of the neighborhood, a deeper dive into redlining, those kind of things. So we'll get into Park Hill and Park Hill Golf Course. And we'll have a lot of staff support in some of this too. There are some initial findings of some of the technical studies that have been done. And I think it would be really healthy to be able to have you hear what some of those findings are. Things around existing conditions, on mobility, parks and open space needs, housing, retail needs, all of those things. That's a part of the dialogue. So we want to make that available to you in the next session. My thought is between those two things, the charter work And the Park Hill, let's level set, that's a whole 2 hours. I do want to make sure we always leave time at the end for any meetings or any sort of closing thoughts or comments, and we'll make space for that in a very tight meeting next time. But I wanted to at least lay that out for you. What I'll do, as I did this time, is I will absolutely send you the agenda. I'll always send you a little homework, and the homework really is to just get your thinking going about what we're doing. And I'm always available if there are any questions that I might answer of you. As your facilitator, my job is to create an experience for you to feel fulfilled at the end of it, and to move us through a process that gets our recommendations in the hands of decision makers. And anything that you need along the way in terms of support in doing that, I'm really happy to do that. This is unprecedented, that you get to an end of a meeting and you have 20 minutes left, but this is really what you can expect of me. We're not going to take 2 hours if it's not 2 hours. Our next meeting is scheduled for March 9th at 5:30. I'm going to be sending you a doodle in your email because I want to play around with what dates and times really do work best for you. And it might not be that it's evening for you. I don't know. So we're going to send that just so we get a general sense of what everybody feels is reasonable. But that one I know is set, I think, March 9th, 5:30 to 7:30. And then you'll get the Zoom link and all of that. What questions do you have? Questions, comments, concerns? Hurry up so I can eat my dinner. What do you need? David, go right ahead. I think you're muted.
Thanks for reminding me on the unmute. I clicked the unraise hand and it wasn't the right button. I want to circle back to my question real quickly about who's paying, and it's not to dwell on that topic. The answers provided were good, solid answers. Okay, that is what it is. But I wanted to add just a little thing that it wasn't meant as a negative question at all, mostly because I consider myself kind of a fiscal hawk, if you will. And I got a little bit fired up yesterday when I read that article in the newspaper about the Colorado Unemployment Division supposedly paying $6 million in fraud claims, and they made it seem like it was nothing. Oh, it's no big deal. It's a small amount, and every dollar counts to a taxpayer. And we're in times with reduced tax income for a variety of reasons. People aren't driving. There's less money for the roads. There's just a whole ton of reasons why tax revenues have fallen. Sales tax, different things. So I just want to I didn't mean it negatively. It's just, I just want money being spent for good things.
Yeah.
Because taxes keep going up and yet they keep spending more money. And it's like, where's this money coming from? Who's paying for it? So that's why I asked the question.
Now, David, I don't think you have to apologize. I don't know about James, but I certainly didn't take it as a negative question. I think if we're not in a space where we can ask those kind of questions, then we're the wrong committee. I appreciate you asking the question, and I think your fiscal astuteness around who's paying for what and how is an important part of the dialogue. Not a problem for me at all.
Dr.
Dave,
Tyler, if I could add just really quick, it's a good point, and something that CPD has been looking into. I believe there was a budget committee of City Council that occurred last week. That discussion of doing a fee related to small area planning when someone enters into a large development review process. So it's definitely something that we are exploring, and heard from council at that time that they were very interested in making sure that we are trying to capture as much money as we should to facilitate these types of conversations.
Thank you, David. Fred, did I see you?
Yeah, I was just gonna, I think David's question is a very reasonable one. I think I've seen plenty on social media, and I've certainly been spoken of disparagingly because of what I do for a living, which is that I'm a real estate developer. So I think it's important in this process to avoid anything that could be construed as a conflict of interest. And I think if West Side was paying for this process, I think there would be a questioning of the validity of the process by some of the people out there. And I don't think that that would be a positive thing. So I seems to me, yeah, I get it. If there were a fee being charged for everybody, as David just mentioned, that would make a lot of sense probably. But on a one-off to say, well, West Side's going to pay for this one, I think just sets us up to, as a committee, to be questioned about what's going on. Well, West Side paid for it, so it's not valid.
Thank you for that, Fred.
Well, I think the implication is whether or not this is a worthy endeavor for the city who's paying for this, and I think it is worthy. So the implication of what David is saying is it not valid? Is the money that's being spent on this valid or not? And I think it is.
Thank you, Mom. Any other thoughts, comments? All right. Courtney, David, is there anything that you need to share with the group before we close everyone out? No? Okay.
I think you hit on everything. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Hey, listen, I want to say thank you to each one of you. It's such a pleasure. I've been looking forward to our time together. Thank you for your contributions tonight. Tonight was a little bit of a, let's just level set some things and get to know each other a little bit. And the real work will start in the next meeting. And I also want to thank the community that took time out of their schedules tonight to join us and to watch. To be the observer sometimes is one of the hardest jobs. So I thank the community for showing up and being so concerned about what happens with the Park Hill Golf Course, as we all are. So thank you. I'm wishing you all a great night, and I'll say see you later. Bye, everybody. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.